And that takes us to item 5, public input. There have been 3 requests. Members, again, I'm very just conscious of the demands here. The standing orders provide for 5 minutes, including questions. We often stretch that a little bit, and I'm always flexible, but if we could maybe limit, a question per councillor and maybe up to 3 councillor questions in the public input. Today we have 3 presenters, and I'll run through them now. We'll hear from, firstly, Will Mackenzie and Arvind Daji on their submissions on 3 transport matters. And I have distributed through our advisor Duncan here their slide presentation, so you might like to just bring that presentation up. I know it's a long presentation, but hopefully you've had a chance to just have a look. And then we'll go to Mr. Laurie Slee from the Cockle Bay Residents and Ratepayers Association, supported by Fiona. And Fiona, I forget your family name, but and we'll hear from you very soon. Fiona Rankin, sorry. And then the third presentation will be from a name and face familiar to us, Brett O'Reilly, the Chief Executive of the Employers and Manufacturers Association, discussing the congestion question, along with his Head of Advocacy and Strategy, Alan McDonald. So we will commence the public input and ask Will and Arvind to come to the table and make your 5-minute presentation, please. Welcome, Will. Welcome, Arvind. And we're in your hands. You've got the pointer there, and you can control your slides, and you're free to proceed.
Thank you, Chair and Councillors. We'll be running through this presentation.
If you could activate the little red button in front of you there when you speak, thank you.
We'll be running through this presentation quickly, so it may be easiest just to watch the screen rather than try and follow on your own screen. We're here to provide for your consideration 3 viable, shovel-ready options that would help address the climate change emergency and get Auckland moving in this decade for $4 billion with savings of 4 to 15 years and $16 to $20 billion. The options have been forwarded to the relevant ministers of the Crown with a request that the options be assessed by university engineering departments. Option 1 is active transport across the Harbour Bridge. Sydney's Harbour Bridge has active transport and narrow 2.9 metre vehicle lanes. The Golden Gate Bridge also has active transport and 6-inch wider lanes at 3.05 metres, as does the original Auckland Harbour Bridge. However, the clip-ons are 50% wider at 4.57 metres. This is Sydney's footpath showing its fencing, and this is 2 traffic lanes and the shared path on the Golden Gate Bridge. And this is the Golden Gate Bridge configuration applied to the eastern clip-on. We propose that the clip-on lanes be reduced to 3.2 metres to accommodate active transport paths, as has been done in Denmark on the bridge pictured in the bottom middle. PricewaterhouseCoopers has looked at this and concluded that narrowing the clip-on lanes would reduce the traffic capacity of the bridge. However, NZTA traffic data shows that the narrow central lanes have as much capacity as the 50% wider clip-on lanes. Footpaths are already in place on both landings, shown here in yellow. The active transport paths are in white. All that is needed is a short cycle path on each landing, shown in blue. That's the northern landing. Option 2, light metro airport to CRL. We propose that a light rail line is built from the airport to Mount Roskill for the $1.4 billion estimated by Jacobs in its 2016 business case. And an additional 4 kilometres of track is built from Mount Roskill, parallel to State Highway 20, to join the rail network at Avondale in 5 years for a total of $1.9 billion, including 2 grade separations. The rolling stock can be similar to Montreal's REM light metro rolling stock, and it can be interoperable with Auckland's rail network. The route goes through land zone for high density development, whereas Dominion Road has a heritage overlay and is flanked by much single-house zoned land. The route also goes through Kianga Ora-owned land in Owairaka, Wesley, Mount Roskill, Favona and Mangere. Once the CRL opens, the network will be very unbalanced, with 2 lines and 3 destinations to the east of the CRL, but only 1 line to the west. Connecting the light metro line to the network at Avondale would balance the network by providing the much needed second line and second destination to the west and south. This would allow up to 48 trains per hour through the CRL, all from one side of the CRL to the other, maximising the benefit of the $4.4 billion investment. Waitemata crossing security. Heavy vehicle use of the clip-ons will likely be restricted in the early 2030s. A new bridge under construction can be launched longitudinally as at Pakuranga. But when an old bridge needs to be replaced, as this bridge on the Ohio River, the replacement bridge is built next to it and then slid sideways once the old bridge is removed. In Auckland, temporary piers in the replacement bridge would be built to the east of the old bridge. The old bridge would be removed and recycled, then the replacement bridge would be slid 40 metres west to its permanent location. The replacement bridge would look identical in appearance to the original bridge, apart from the lower deck. However, as this bridge in Pennsylvania shows, that lower deck would be unobtrusive. This is a profile image. The replacement has been costed at $2 billion. NZTA forecasts heavy vehicle restrictions by the 2030s, and bridge replacement has been assessed as being feasible. The replaced bridge would allow light rail to reach the North Shore. The light rail would have the same dimensions as Auckland's existing rail network. It would travel through the Wynyard Quarter and along Quay Street, a route that rail used to take until the 1970s. North Shore Light Rail would be integrated with Auckland's rapid rail transit system with 1 seat travel to the airport. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate that, and thank you for a comprehensive presentation that you forwarded earlier. We'll take, if we could take questions, if we could limit it to 1 question per councillor. Councillor Walker.
So, commendations, Will. I mean, great lateral thought. So, question, what do we need to do to advance consideration of these suggestions?
I think you need to take it to government, take the 3 options to government and the proposals, and then hopefully they can take them to relevant university engineering schools for assessment and to show the viability of it, basically. Yeah.
Already engaged with the university, I understand.
Yes, on the one project we have, but not on the other 2. We've had engineering advice, but not from university engineering departments. Professional engineers are very media shy. They never say anything about anything.
Councillor Watson, please.
Thank you, Will. Very interesting presentation, and your first couple of graphics here of the Harbour Bridge have confirmed what I've been experiencing for about 40 years, is that it is tighter going down those inside lanes, but there's no discernible difference in the capacity of traffic that goes through. My question goes to the walkway, cycleway that I think you had the example of San Francisco or some such bridge beside it. Those cages can be a little more susceptible to noise and kind of not that pleasant an environment. Would there be an ability to noise proof it? And I think of some of the examples like the Rainbow Bridge in Tokyo, which has a similar type of arrangement.
See on the image there, we've just shown arched barriers there. In Sydney, they just have metal cages, which may be appropriate in Sydney, but you could have perspex or anything you like to make it more pleasant.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Cooper?
Thank you. A lot of effort into this, but what I see is missing is you've got commuter rail red line, but how do you propose to deal with the existing and rapidly growing population in the northwest? Because that current rail that doesn't go to Kumeu, only goes to Swanson, cuts out around about 150,000 catchment. So Hobsonville Te Atatu Peninsula, West Harbour, Whenuapai, and Red Hills, which will have 30,000 people within the next few years. So there's no proposal here at all. How do you propose to deal with that lack of RTN?
Well, in 40 pages, we didn't cover the northwest. However, if we had more pages, you can show that the planned light rail out alongside the northwestern motorway, you can integrate it with that.
So it's not planned into
Oh, well,
back to a bus lane.
yeah, you can integrate the rail into this system here. Thank you.
Finally, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you for the presentation. My question follows on from Councillor Walker's, that, you know, despite the fact that we've had amalgamation and fewer agencies involved, there are still the sort of multiple arms of NZTA and AT and so forth. So in terms of your submission to us with the Planning Committee, what specific actions under the delegations that the Planning Committee has are you wanting us to take?
Well, you're familiar with those than I am, and there may be something appropriate that you know about, but all we're asking is that you ask the government to examine it. I think in your agenda, not many pages after our item, there's a 3-page letter from NZTA, Auckland Transport / Auckland Council. And if you go through that letter, you can see they're talking about getting things done by 2050. So, Councillor Fletcher, if you have a way of taking our presentation and putting it through your processes that can get it assessed in a meaningful way, then we'd appreciate it.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, obviously, what you're really calling on is greater contestability in the way that these decisions are made, but our agency is Auckland Transport, so it would obviously have to be referred on to them for their consideration. But thank you for the presentation.
Welcome.
Well, thank you, Will, and thank you, Arvin. So, look, we'll take your presentation and material. Just before we go, we'll make sure it's socialised with Auckland Transport and Waka Kotahi. We'll find a channel to go there. There is a lot of work being undertaken on LRT. Of course, there's a reset that the government have committed to, and that reset involves Auckland Council and Auckland Transport actually being at the table at the earliest this time. It's different to last time. And of course, there's the Waitemata Harbour connections study, the strategic study that reported in about 6 weeks ago. And the agencies, along with Auckland Council, will be progressing that to the next stage. So there's actually quite a lot of work that is very live at the moment in those two big capital-rich projects. So we'll take your presentations and we'll furnish them through to the respective agencies. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And thanks for your thinking about this. I'll have a mover. Councillor Fletcher? Councillor Watson? Thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Now we'll invite Laurie Slee and Fiona Rankin to come up on behalf of the Cockle Bay Residents and Ratepayers Association. This relates to the report before us, members discussing integrated residential developments. Welcome, Laurie and Fiona. And all yours, Laurie.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee. Just as a little bit of background, I'm chair of the Cockle Bay Residents and Ratepayers Association, and I'm speaking in that capacity. What I wanted to do was talk about community perceptions of IRDs and the importance of elected representatives setting out clearly understood policy guidelines and definitions. I'm not talking about the 2 cases that are currently before the Environment Court. This is future-oriented policy issues. On 12th of December, we wrote to all councillors expressing the view that clearer policy directions needed to be given to staff in relation to the definition of what constitutes an IRD and to processing consent applications for such developments in single house zones throughout all of Auckland. I raised 5 specific issues, requesting elected representatives to consider them. I've been asked to focus my presentation this morning on issue 2 in my letter, with other issues being referred to the Resource Consents team. I would make the point here that ratepayers see the council as a single institution working towards achieving unified goals and objectives. We also see the Planning Committee as near the apogee of that institution. Good governance principles mean that we do not see policy implementation being undertaken in organisational silos. Issue 2 of my letter requested councillors to expedite the proposed review and plan change relating to IRDs. And since writing this, I have actually seen the item subsequently on the agenda, which is moving in the right direction. But the review and clearer definitions will bring major benefits of avoiding future costly consent applications that do not meet objectives and policies for the single house zone. It will also avoid developers investing time and expense developing non-compliant applications. At the core of the issue is the question of what exactly elected representatives, not staff, are trying to achieve with IRDs in the single house zone. The definition has morphed from the original definition in the PAUP of developments in 2 specific locations intended to integrate with other infrastructure in that area, through the definition in the AUP, which focused on welfare, medical facilities, rest homes, retirement homes, etc., to the version in the workshop on the subject, which talks more about a range of complementary, misspelt, facilities for recreational, social and community use of residents, with zero reference to surrounding infrastructure or how such developments are differentiated from other apartments that may incorporate similar facilities. Overlaying that definition, we have planner statements about wanting intensification in the single house zone in order to increase housing supply, and in different interpretations of planners on the scope of IRDs. Our major contention is that it is vital that citizens can rely on the integrity of the AUP rather than having creeping intensification against local expectations which have been based on the policies and objectives of the single house zone as set out in the AUP. Our letter was written to stimulate urgent policy debate and guidance from elected representatives on what they see as the interests of local residents and whether intensification within the single house zone throughout Auckland is a policy objective they support. If all that happens as a result of our letter and presentation this morning is that you receive my input and thank me for attending, then I would consider this something of a waste of time. If you are prepared to require a timetable for action, including responses to my other points, then it rests with me to thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurie. Anything to add, Fiona? Thank you. Questions? Councillor Cooper, please.
If you don't mind, it's just a comment. I'm really happy to take flack as a decision maker who voted on the unitary plan, but I'm not happy to accept criticism of our staff because they are only following the rules. So I just want to make a comment because it does really affect our staff when they're criticised by that are following the rules of the decisions and plans that we have made.
Yes, and I think we all agree with that. Our staff are under enormous pressure and we'll take the brunt of that and that's our job as politicians to wear that criticism. That's a fair comment. Any other questions for Mr. Slee or Ms. Rankin, members? We've got this paper coming up, got good support for it, and you were the generators of us coming to reconsider this area of the unitary plan. So thank you for your earlier contributions and your contribution here today.
Thank you.
Councillor Simpson, would you like to move? And seconded, Councillor Fletcher.
I was just going to say you might like to, I don't know whether you can stay and hear the actual item, but are you going to follow up directly with the people? Is what our decision is a bit later?
Follow up in response to, I'm sure the staff know who the key stakeholders are and will be notifying them of the decisions that we're likely to take today to set and train the plan change process. Okay, do that, take note. Thank you. Moved to Councillor Simpson and seconded Councillor Fletcher. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Fiona. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thanks, members. Now we'll be without our familiar face of Brett O'Reilly, but we do have the familiar face of Alan McDonald from the Employers and Manufacturers Association. Alan heads up the Advocacy and Strategy Unit there, and you are discussing the paper that we're coming to later in the morning, Alan, on the congestion question. Phil.
Yes, good morning, and thanks for giving us the time. Really just want to follow up on the MOT report that came out last week on congestion charging. It's good that they've finally caught up with us on that. And I say caught up because a few years ago now, nearly 4, we produced this, which is the NZIER study that's constantly referred to as the 1.2 billion in savings from congestion. It was actually commissioned by ourselves, Auckland Airport, Ports of Auckland, National Road Carriers and Infrastructure New Zealand. So that lineup of groups were already ahead of the curve on introducing congestion charging. We just see it as critical to getting the best out of our roading network, but also reducing that terrible congestion that we all suffer. And we need to do it now. Basically, we need to start leading the conversation and the debate to get some action underway. The technology already exists. It can be introduced very quickly, and it does bring significant results. So the behaviour changes you get, apart from the bump on public transport, which can be somewhere between a range of about 8 to 10%, is the experience overseas. But just the behaviour change is around 4 to 5% of reduced traffic in the peak period. And if you want to know what that looks like, well, school holidays are about a 6 to 10% reduction. So it would be driving around in the school holidays permanently in Auckland. The gains are significant. The 1.2 billion figure that's referred to is well out of date. It will be higher now. Also, that study was only done over 5 working days because Auckland Transport doesn't measure congestion at the weekends. And as you all know, it's probably worse at the weekends in some areas than others. And we are a 7-day-a-week economy. So that's the commercial side, but there's also the social side of it as well. So if you look at the gains, for example, we got out of the tunnel, that it's anecdotally, a number of our members got at least 1 job a day back. So that's your man in a van type economy. So being able to transit through the tunnel has made a huge difference to getting around in that particular area of Auckland. And some of the losses that are highlighted in this report, for example, there's a carpet company that employs 25% more people, more staff, to do the same amount of work, and it's simply because of congestion. And I'd probably caution you against getting stuck in a lift, because the lift companies now say that instead of getting you out in an hour, they'll get you out in 4. And that's all down to congestion. So those are the sort of gains that you can get. And we can't afford to wait. And you hear constantly the refrain of, well, we haven't got a comprehensive public transport network alternative, and we never will. So vehicle kilometres travelled are increasing faster than the exponential growth that we're already seeing in public transport. So if we keep waiting for things like the CRL, and that will make a significant difference, if we keep waiting for things like the various busways, light rail proposals, all those sorts of things, we'll never capture the gains that are there for both commercial and social purposes. So, there is the concern obviously around the social impact and the cost, so that's where you set your caps. If you set it originally in the central city, most of the population doesn't come into the central city. You can have graduated charging, so you have the shoulder charge, the peak charge, etc. on either side of the peak. And probably the technology will be sophisticated enough where you could do discounted rates for socio-economic brackets and things like that. That's if you went to something like the Bluetooth type system, or instead of number plate recognition, that's available now, the number plate recognition. The system in Singapore that they're developing, which will be the gold standard, we don't need to wait for that. There are alternatives that we can use now. So the timing of the introduction is the key thing, and really that's a matter of political will. So I've been on a number of delegations with Infrastructure New Zealand around the world, and what you see with major infrastructure projects like this is that the successful ones are all driven either by an individual or a group like a council or government, or the governance group. In some cases, particularly in Canada, they have quite sophisticated PPP models, for example. And I'm not suggesting that this would be a PPP, but for example, their system that introduced the light rail from the airport to the city in time for the Vancouver Olympics was driven by a PPP group, but that had significant council input. So what I would suggest, and I know there's an ATAP refresh coming up very soon, and congestion charging is in the longer term part of ATAP, is there is an opportunity to bring it forward. There's an opportunity for council to lead, because if you don't lead the debate the way, for example, that you led the CRL debate, we'll still be talking about this in another 4 or 5 or 10 years, and we'll have lost that opportunity around the commercial side and the social impacts as well. So we would also offer our assistance in leading that debate with council. That's it.
Thank you, Alan. Look, you talked about the MOT report, and yeah, the soft release was from the MOT, but it is a joint government and Auckland Council report, all the agencies, Treasury, Waka Kotahi, so we're all responsible, and we need to jointly track this through. But thank you. And just a question, you mentioned the tunnel, travel time benefits, productivity benefits of the tunnel. You're referring to Western Ring Route Tunnel or the Victoria Tunnel, or both?
Western Ring Route.
Western Ring Route. Okay, good. Councillor Walker, question.
Just got a question, and I understand your position. Does the Employers Association actively promote travel planning for members of the association? Travel planning being a well-developed mechanism where industries, companies can reduce their travel in vehicles. So
most of the more sophisticated operators will be using GPS planning anyway to do that. But the impact for many of our businesses is they can't plan their travel. So if you're a man in a van and you've got a job, you've got to go to the job, right? So that's the issue. It's the inability to get around the city, and particularly on the arterials, which are heavily congested most of the day in some cases. So yeah, active travel planning is something that businesses take on themselves. We've talked about it with our members. We don't promote it as such, but you will obviously get significant gains, reductions in emissions and things as well from the congestion charging, because it does discourage people from taking those journeys, the unnecessary ones in particular. So there are significant gains right across the board.
Thanks, Alan. Councillor Cashmore, please.
Thanks, Mr Chair. Thanks, Alan. You talked about having a congestion charging or smart transport pricing system based on 7 days a week. Given that a third of the traffic movements on any day of the week are for either recreational or they're not essential, and the report recommends 5, so could you just briefly discuss that?
Oh, so the 7-day-a-week reference bill was just simply to the measurement of the congestion that's in this report. It's only measured on 5 days. You would realistically only implement the congestion charging regime on the weekdays, the work weekdays, I think, because of that social impact.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Mr McDonald. So you have told us, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Auckland, in your opinion, will never have a comprehensive enough public transport system, so why wait? Am I characterising you right?
I think, yeah, the comment is that if you wait for the public transport system, you'll never get there.
Okay.
Because the VKTs are increasing at an exponential rate as well, vehicle kilometres travelled. So private vehicle use is growing faster than public transport use. And public transport use, while it's exponentially growing, won't catch up.
Okay, so a follow-up on that question. Does it not concern you that, for example, we have over 100,000 people in the northwest that do not have a rapid transit system at the moment?
Yes, it does, but you will get better use of the existing network that you have if you apply congestion charging. So, you know, there is a plan for the Northwestern Busway. There was a plan to put a light rail up there. You could still expand the rail network even further north, or northwest in this case. But you will get better use out of the roading network that you've got, and when you have the busway, you'll get increased use over the current predictions on how many people will use that busway.
Sorry, if it's okay, Chair, one more supplement. Thank you. So a lot of those people that live in those northwest communities are some of the most deprived communities in Auckland. What would you suggest in terms of compensating to help people on a regressive charge such as this?
So that's why you have the shoulder charges in the off-peak periods, but also if you were to, for example, have a reduction in the petrol tax or the road tax regime, or, you know, the Auckland transport tax as well. So you could use that as an offset.
Thank you. Just keep in mind too, this is not being implemented today. It's possibly subject to decisions. It's 25 to 28. So
yeah, we'd push for a quicker time frame than that.
I know you. Yeah. Thank you. And lastly, Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Ellen. And like me, you've been around quite a while on this issue. It's always been controversial, but I'm just going to remind you that this has been around, that I'm aware of, as long as it is since the introduction of water pricing in Auckland. So we're talking, you know, some 20 odd years ago, and that was hugely controversial. But now, and especially during the water crisis, everyone just accepted that water pricing and user pay on utilities like that was highly successful. So what do you say to the Auckland Council and the legacy councils as to why we have been such poor advocates on this issue? And I agree with you that we'll always be in catch-up mode because of population growth and everything else. What would you see as the most effective strategy going forward to engage a government of all colours, you know, I'm not singling anyone out, that seems not to want to touch anything that is potentially toxic?
Yeah, it is a bit of a political lightning rod. And I think if you go back to the CRL example where business threw its weight, its considerable weight in behind the lobbying for that, and the business groups that I mentioned that commissioned this report, they would all add their weight to the arguments, as I think the Chamber would as well, although it's hard to speak for Michael because you're never quite sure what he's going to say next. But, you know, those business groups would help with the advocacy for it. Certainly willing to lead it if that becomes necessary, but really politically it has to be the council, I think, that lead this if you're going to have it introduced for Auckland for the good of all Aucklanders. And it is for a greater good because, yes, there are some social impacts. You can offset those. If you really wanted to grasp a stinging nettle, you could use it as a revenue raiser to fund your public transport network as well. And that might be very politically unpopular. But if you were, for example, bringing in $200 million a year in congestion charging as revenue, you know, there's $1 billion a year you can put to your public transport.
Well, what we prove with water is that it has really good conservation outcomes.
It does, yeah.
And I think we might have a similar parallel here.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
If you could pass regards to Brett, and thanks for your submission here today. It's consistent with the infrastructure.
And apologies from Brett, sorry, I should have started with that.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So look, thank you, appreciate it. And of course, you're a key stakeholder in this, and you'll be travelling with us on this journey prior to us making any decisions on any certainty of delivery of congestion charging. Somebody like to move Councillor Watson and I did actually. Can I take Councillor Watson and Councillor Simpson, please? Sorry, Councillor Mulholland, I was asked that before. I'll take Councillor Simpson, Councillor Mulholland, with a vote of thanks for Ellen and the EMA. Thank you, Ellen. All those in favour say aye, contrary no, declare that carried. Thank you. Members will now go. Welcome Member Honeck and Member Taiperi, who's just popped out. Welcome Member Honeck. And so Members Honeck and Taiperi are standing in for Members Tol Henare and Leanne Namani today on behalf of the Independent Māori Statutory Board.